What will the AI revolution mean for jobs, for our kids, for our relationships, and our daily lives? A new podcast, Pioneers of AI, is your trusted guide to this emerging technology. Host Rana Al-Kaoubi is an AI scientist, entrepreneur, author, and investor, exploring all the opportunities and questions AI brings into our lives. Listen to Pioneers of AI with new episodes every Wednesday, wherever you tune in. Hey listeners, when it comes to AI, it's hard to decipher what's real, what's hype, and what you need to know. To help make sense of it all, we recommend you listen to the TED AI Show. Host creative technologist and AI innovator Bilawal Sadhu sits down with guests for a deep dive into the thrilling world of tech and its effect on business, education, and more. Each episode will leave you more informed with tools to help you navigate the future of tech. Get ahead of the curve and check out the TED AI Show wherever you get your podcasts.
Stay tuned after today's episode to hear Sam and I break down the key points made by our guest.
In what ways are we over-reliant on AI technologies? On today's episode, we chat with a journalist who shares some of his fears about AI.
I'm Jeremy Kahn from Fortune, and you're listening to Me, Myself, and AI.
Welcome to Me, Myself, and AI, a podcast on artificial intelligence and business. Each episode, we introduce you to someone innovating with AI. I'm Sam Ransbotham, professor of analytics at Boston College. I'm also the AI and business strategy guest editor at MIT Sloan Management Review.
And I'm Shervin Korobande, senior partner with BCG and one of the leaders of our AI business. Together, MIT SMR and BCG have been researching and publishing on AI since 2017, interviewing hundreds of practitioners and surveying thousands of companies on what it takes to build and to deploy and scale AI capabilities and really transform the way organizations operate.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. Shervin and I are excited to be talking with Jeremy Kahn. He's the AI editor at Fortune magazine. At Fortune, he writes its weekly newsletter, Eye on AI. He's also the author of a book, Mastering AI, a survival guide to our superpowered future. Jeremy, we're looking forward to talking today.
It's great to be here.
So I'll raise a complaint first. I would plan to skim the book and try to pull out a highlight or two, but it was interesting. And so it unfortunately cost me a lot more hours this weekend preparing than I planned. So that's my angry start to this podcast.
That's a good
episode.
complaint. This is what Sam's compliments always sound like.
Yeah. I was going to say sorry, not sorry on that one. It's like...
Well, but maybe go negative here. We hear a ton about the benefits of AI, but let's start with some of these risks that you foresee. I thought you did a nice job outlining those. For example, you caution against letting AI cognitive prowess diminish our own prowess. Can you walk us through how some powerful tool might diminish our own human abilities?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things I'm concerned about is that this technology is in some ways so easy to use and so seductive that we'll sort of overuse it and as a result lose some of our important cognitive abilities. One I worry about is just critical thinking. I mean, anyone who's used one of these chatbots from OpenAI or Anthropic or any of the others, it gives you a very fluid, plausible, pat answer and a very capsule summary of whatever information you want. And I think it's just really easy to kind of take that answer and not think too hard about it and go off and say, oh, I've got the answer. And in the way these systems are currently designed, there's no real prompting of the user to think about the provenance of the information that they're receiving. And in fact, in some cases, the way these things are designed, there's no way, the system itself doesn't really understand the provenance of the information it's giving you. So it can't actually tell you how it knows what it knows.
Explain provenance, though, to start with.
Yeah, so provenance, I mean, what was the source of this information? Any particular fact, it's telling you where did that come from? Or its analysis, how did it arrive at that? And, People said some of these things about Google. When Google came along, there was some criticism that Google was going to make us stupid. But one of the good things about Google is at least you have these links. So you have to think about, where's the information coming from? At least there's something there in the UX that kind of prompts you to think about the source of information. If you want to know more than just the few lines that the link displays, you have to click the link. You don't have to do any of that with a generative AI-based chatbot response. And I worry about that. I worry we're just not going to think too hard about where's this information come from. So that's one of the ones I'm concerned about. The other is the tendency with these LLMs to think that writing and thinking are completely separate activities. I'll just give the system a few bullet points and it will write the whole essay for me, and it will do all the hard work of thinking through the arguments. And I worry about that because, again, I think writing and thinking are not actually separable activities, that it's really through writing that we refine a lot of our reasoning. Very often you find holes in your own argument when you actually go down and write something long form that you haven't thought of when you just outlined a few bullet points. And again, there's some tendencies that were already there with other technologies. PowerPoint, most famously, had this tendency to reduce things to bullet points, often with some negative repercussions. That's why Jeff Bezos had famously kind of banned PowerPoint presentations at Amazon, because he was very worried about the kind of sloppy thinking that came in when you just had people delineate their thoughts in bullet points.
First of all, I agree with both of your points. And I think the first point you made about is it making us stupider? I think we've actually seen that documented. BCG did one of the largest controlled studies with MIT, Harvard, and Wharton, where we looked at 1,000 strong consultants, and they were given ChatGPT to work with. And in certain tasks that included broad, creative thinking, ideation, they actually did better when they were told to use the tool versus those who weren't, because it expands the realm of possibilities for many in terms of like, how do you create a campaign, or how do you consider this from different angles? But on things that consultants are supposed to excel at, like, business strategy problem solving, like what is the best strategy for a company in Southeast Asia that's trying to enter a market? Here's the revenues, here's the competitors, etc. Gen AI didn't do really as good. And in fact, what we saw is that group, there were sort of a reinforcement of the wrong thing because it was an over-reliance, as you said, on something that doesn't work. So for sure, we've seen it will take critical thinking away. But I also feel like the paradigm change is when, before all these large language models, AI was a tool that would help us predict better or optimize or do things that humans couldn't do. I think, as you say now, Jeremy, we've entered a phase where AI is doing that which humans could do too, and in many ways better. We think of it as more of a coworker than a tool. And so now you have a coworker, and just like with a coworker, you need to challenge them. And when you're having a conversation, I find the best outputs that I get from a Gen AI chat is when I really engage with it the same way I would engage like a young associate or a young apprentice, and you challenge them. And then often it says, yep, I made a mistake. I'll go deeper. And if you don't take it, as you were saying, at face value, you get to the answer. What sort of worries me in the long term is the first thing you said, which is, are we overusing it? What have humans invented that they haven't overused?
What will the AI revolution mean for jobs, for our kids, for our relationships, and our daily lives? A new podcast, Pioneers of AI, is your trusted guide to this emerging technology. Host Rana Al-Kaoubi is an AI scientist, entrepreneur, author, and investor, exploring all the opportunities and questions AI brings into our lives. Listen to Pioneers of AI with new episodes every Wednesday, wherever you tune in.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there is that risk. That's why in the book I talk a little bit about why I think there should be very specific design choices to try to prompt people not to overuse it. But of course, the companies developing the product have no incentive really to get you not to use it. So it's a bit of a problem. But it would be useful if, as part of the design, there was something that sort of prompted you to think about the source of this information. I want to talk about using it as a kind of a junior colleague. That's kind of interesting. And I actually think one of the ways you can avoid some of these risks is If you don't use it that way, so you do the initial drafting of the document or the proposal, or, in your example of the strategy for the company, like the human consultant would do that initially, and then ask the system to act as almost like a senior colleague to critique it. And I think actually sometimes you both get the benefits of this large knowledge base it can draw from. It does sometimes point out things that you've missed or that, you didn't think about. And you don't have the de-skilling risk that you have when you do treat it as the kind of initial drafter of things, as the one who's going to do the work of the junior colleagues. That's maybe a way that we should train people to use the systems, to think about it more as a coach or an editor, auditor of our work, as opposed to the initial drafter.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I've noticed that my own use of a plain old text editor has gone up versus... Because I find that all the spelling correction and grammar correction is a distraction when I'm trying to think about what I'm thinking about. And so I've gone kind of old school and bare bones here. Maybe I'll be using Vim before too long.
Yeah.
So AI is not going to go away, though. What can people practically do to avoid this? I guess one suggestion is draft it first. Are there other things we could suggest?
Yeah, I think draft it first. I think training of people about what these systems are actually good at and what they're not. So at least you have that awareness. That should be part of how employees are kind of trained to use these systems as co-pilots, as well as students, as this gets introduced into education, that they're taught what are the strengths and weaknesses of these systems and what can't they do, and show people some examples of how it hallucinates or how it can miss whole lines of argument, maybe because they're not represented as well in the data set.
I agree with everything you're saying, and because I feel the same way.
Well, that's no fun. Come on.
I mean, no, but there was going to be a but, because I have children in high school, and I see the benefits, I see the risks, right? Like my son was saying, I saw him on it, I'm like, what are you doing? You're doing math with it? He says, look, I don't understand how to solve this problem. It's teaching me, and now I'm going to do it on my own. And then it's going to critique me. I'm like, great, that's fine. But the point that it can take a significant amount of cognitive load away from humans, and sometimes that's good and sometimes that's dangerous, I think that point is not lost on people. My worry is that in reality it's not going to happen, because this is very early stages, right? We're talking about something that's 2 years old that right out of the gate was great, is getting better, it's improved by like orders of magnitude, and it has some flaws. But the other thing I see is, we're talking about individual use of it, right? But when you think about all of these investments are basically done for the enterprise, or being used by the enterprise, or being consumed by the enterprise, and that's where like billions and trillions continue to go in it. I still think that's in very early stages. And what I worry about there is that the gap between the haves and have-nots is going to increase significantly at the company level, right? Like we had... Sam, in our research, we talked about the AI gap and like the 10% who are getting significant value versus most who aren't, and what do they do? I feel like that's even going to narrow more because of the sort of exponential power that this new generation has. And I think that the challenge that many companies are going to have is also the challenge of rethinking their skill set and their talent. And, now that I could use AI to do things that 1,000 people could do, maybe make it 50% more effective in a co-worker mode, what kind of talent do I need? How do I hire them? I think the 10% that we talked about in our prior generation of AI, Sam, right? I think those 10% are going to be those who in the long term figure out the talent play and the skill play, and they become sort of new companies.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about that. One of the things I highlight in the book is the risk that thems that got shall get sort of thing. Those that already are sort of ahead and have the largest pool of data and have figured out how to use this technology well already are more likely to continue to pull ahead of others. I think that's true both sort of within professions and across industries. And I do take your point about talent, but I think you need both. I think you both need a workforce that is going to be extremely flexible. I think that's the lesson here, is that, I'm not a big believer in the idea that we're going to see mass unemployment from AI. In fact, quite the opposite. Yeah. But I do think most people's jobs are going to change, and you have to be flexible. And I think the companies that have the most resilient and flexible workforces in some ways will do the best because, I'm talking about how these systems work right now, and they might work very differently in 20 years. Absolutely, they will. And if you're just starting your career, I think you have to be prepared to be riding this wave of this evolution of this technology. Today, it would be helpful to you to have quite a lot of prompt engineering skill, the way the systems work right now. I don't think that's going to necessarily be true in 10 years because I think we will have perfected away some of that, optimized away some of the need for that.
When I was listening to you, Jeremy, my mind went into not just the workers being reskilled or retrained or maybe just new talent coming in, like companies hiring people that they normally wouldn't hire because they have spikes and things that AI doesn't have. But my mind went into actually the younger generation. And I was going to ask you, Sam, like as an educator, as a professor, what do you think we could do in schools now for these young people? When we went to school, if we thought deeply and we memorized a lot of things, read a lot and do a lot of math and exhibit hard work, we pretty much did well. And I think
spoken like a true engineer.
Okay, fine. For like science and engineering fields, that was the case. And what do you think this is going to mean for high school and college sort of education disciplines in like 5 to 10 years from now?
Yeah, sure. And I have kids approximately the same age, and we deal with university students all the time. And I worry about this advice to be flexible. I mean, not that I disagree with it, but I wonder if it has about the same amount of substance that buy low and sell high does. I think no one's going to take the counter argument that, oh yeah, you should be more rigid and less flexible. But how do we get them to do that? I mean, I have some techniques that we use in class, but Jeremy, how do we go beyond sort of a, yes, be flexible? Is there something that people should do? If someone's listening right now, what should they do tomorrow to be more flexible?
That's a very good question. And I'm not sure I have really great answers for that, except that I think people should have to change fairly frequently. I mean, I think the only way to become adaptable is to actually practice adapting. I think some jobs are naturally more like that than others. Some have kind of rote processes or ways of doing things that they don't change very often, or a person's not asked to change very often in what they do. And I think some others have to kind of learn on the fly. You have to constantly evolve. Maybe you're facing different challenges or questions every day. And I think for students, you could actually force them to learn in different ways at different points, even year to year or term to term. But I think that sort of thing, like building that into the educational system, would be a way to teach people to change and to adapt. I don't really know other ways of doing it. I spent some time talking to folks at NASA about how they try to teach astronauts to work alongside automated systems. In the book, I was talking about this issue about vigilance. If you're constantly just putting the person in this mode where all they have to do is kind of babysit an automated system, humans are really terrible at it. So and NASA tried all sorts of different ways to get people to be better at it, and they ultimately couldn't get people to be better at it except by introducing faults at like random intervals so that the people were constantly on guard, which was an interesting insight. But I think maybe we have to do something similar in terms of training students or the workforce, where you kind of artificially introduce disruption and change in order to teach people to get used to disruption and change.
That's an interesting idea. Actually, it reminds me, I think you had an example in the book about an experiment at Georgia Tech, which I, of course, noted because that's my background. But people followed robots who were clearly demonstrating that they were making mistakes over and over again. And yeah, they still followed the robot even after the robot was exhibiting these mistakes. And I thought that was pretty fascinating. One of the things you're saying is it's incumbent on educators and the educational system to introduce doubt in these systems and introduce, the idea that they will fail. That makes a lot of sense. And if NASA does it, then I believe it.
I think we could draw a lot of lessons on, from both the space industry and the aviation industry, which have worked alongside the automated systems of various kinds for decades. I think one of the most undervalued aspects of this is what they call human factor engineering or human-computer interaction. I think those things are really going to come into prominence.
And one of the things about the interacting with the device versus interacting with the people is this empathy question. And it in some ways, interacting with the device makes us less empathetic.
Yeah.
Hey, listeners. When it comes to AI, it's hard to decipher what's real, what's hype, and what you need to know. To help make sense of it all, we recommend you listen to the TED AI Show. host creative technologist and AI innovator Bilawal Sadhu sits down with guests for a deep dive into the thrilling world of tech and its effect on business, education, and more. Each episode will leave you more informed with tools to help you navigate the future of tech. Get ahead of the curve and check out the TED AI Show wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, I speak a lot about empathy in the book. It is ultimately, I think, the thing that is uniquely human, the fact that we can relate to one another based on our own lived experience and relate to others' lived experience. And the problem with AI technology is it has no lived experience. And chatbots can mimic empathy pretty well. They can sound sympathetic, empathetic, but it's not authentic. It's ultimately kind of a fraud. The empathy isn't real. And I think we need to keep in mind this distinction between real empathy and its imitation. And I worry, particularly with people using chatbots as kind of substitute friends, as kind of companions, that this is another kind of disskilling of an essential human skill, and never have to talk to anybody else and never have to deal with real humans who are, much messier creatures to deal with. Particularly, there's some interesting studies about men who have been left alone with Alexa, basically the Amazon digital assistant, and it's an environment where they didn't realize they were being recorded in any way, and they were really abusive to particularly the female voiced AI Alexa assistant. Very quickly, things descended into kind of misogynistic language and talk. And then there were some studies of those men and their interactions later with real people, and they carried over sometimes some of those habits of dialogue to real relationships. And I think that's dangerous. And people were very worried about that with kids, actually. It's one of the reasons there was actually some pressure put on Amazon to introduce a mode to Alexa that a parent can turn on, where the Alexa will only respond if the child is polite and says please and thank you. Again, that's one of those things we might want to consider in other AI systems is, are we using these systems to kind of prompt us as humans to be polite in our interactions?
Let me transition here. We've got a series of rapid fire questions. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? What do you see as the biggest opportunity for AI right now?
I think drug discovery is maybe the biggest opportunity.
And we've certainly seen some examples of that with COVID. I hope we don't have another similar opportunity coming up. What's the biggest misconception that people have about artificial intelligence?
That we're all going to lose our jobs.
Yeah, the whole fear-mongering of the job loss. So what was the first career that you wanted?
The first career I wanted?
Yeah.
So I wanted to be an archaeologist at one point.
Yeah, so that really ties into your desire for data provenance then. You can make a connection between the roots of data and the roots of... Anyway, all right. When is there too much artificial intelligence?
I think there's too much if it's doing things where you want human emotion and connection. I think there's a great example with that Google Olympics ad where they had the kid writing the fan letter and the dad had the kid in the ad use AI to write the fan letter. And there was such backlash against that. I think rightfully so. That's something where, you want the kid to do that. That's like this connection with their hero. And there's a lot of learning that takes place in the writing of that letter. And that's one of these, fundamental human experiences that's based on connection between two people. You don't want AI doing that.
Yeah, this is why we have the machines to do these other things, not to do the fun parts. Is there one thing you wish that artificial intelligence could do right now that it can't?
Yeah, I'd like it to actually do my shopping for me, which it can't quite do. I think it's going to very soon be able to do this. I'm really looking forward to it.
Jeremy, it's been wonderful having you on the show. Thanks for coming on and for inspiring a lot of deep thoughts about the future.
Great. It's been fantastic to be here.
Hey, sure, that was fun. It was a different conversation. We often focus on some of the positives from artificial intelligence, but I think Jeremy had some good risk that didn't go crazy existential robots are going to take over the world types of risk, but some very subtle how AI is changing our behavior types of risk that I think were interesting to think about. What do you think people could learn from what Jeremy said?
Just like any piece of technology, you cannot treat it like a black box. The users have to have a certain level of understanding of what are the limitations, what are the risks, what kinds of things can I not worry about the output, and where are some areas where I need to sort of probe and push and go a bit deeper.
I think a certain level of understanding is a problem, though. What is that certain level? I don't think we're asking people to understand how I don't know, silicon transistors work. That doesn't seem necessary for understanding the modern world of AI. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, we're coming pretty hard against the idea of just accepting everything AI says. So I think finding that middle seems tough. Do you need to be able to make a model yourself? Do you need to be able to use a model? Where's the line?
I don't think the understanding that I was talking about is a technical understanding, but it is a tool that has limitations. And just like when you're driving a car, you need to have some understanding that when you're driving 30 miles an hour and you apply the brake, you'll stop much sooner than if you're driving 100 miles an hour.
And if it's wet, that'll change that equation.
And it will change that equation depending on the condition of the road and your tires and all these things. I mean, in reality, some people learn those the hard ways. And that's why they teach these things in driving schools. And they teach people, what to do in case of a skid. I think that's sort of the analog. So while I think, first of all, I don't think the conversation was necessarily dark. I mean, I think there's just so much over exuberance over AI that a little bit of
that's a better way of phrasing
back to reality I think will be good, and I think a better way to paint maybe even, which is not something Jeremy did, but the most extremely potential negative situation to create that dialectic that you could then start thinking of it the other way.
But switching to your tire example, I think that's a good one. I mean, to me, I don't know, and I think probably you the same with your engineering background, you're thinking about friction, you're thinking about coefficients of friction that change as the surface changes. I'm in the middle of teaching our 16-year-old how to drive, and there's so much that you take for granted that I have forgotten about.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, so much of my driving, even now, I think about things that I was taught, and like when the conditions change, most of them, thank God, are things that I haven't needed to do myself, like experientially. But I was told it's raining, there's a thin film of oil. You will not see it or feel it unless it's too late. So slow down. But that's my point. Like when you're driving, you're not thinking about those things. But you do know that, hey, it started raining, I'm going to slow down. Like that's what most people on the freeway do. Like as soon as it starts raining a little bit, because they've been told you just have to slow down because there's going to be a film of oil and it's going to be dangerous. And so
you drive different places than I do, I think.
Well, what I was going to say though is that be adaptable, I still think is a goal and an outcome we drive to. But the question is, how do you become adaptable? And I think it starts with education. And I think that just like with any tool, just like when they taught people how to use spreadsheets, they said, look, you can have the totals, but then you need to have some kind of a check. And if you don't, you might have a great spreadsheet and it's going to make a mistake. And if you're linking spreadsheets, I do feel like that is the piece that's going to unlock this level of adaptability and caution, etc., which is just by demystifying it and by teaching, by having multiple situations of an answer gone wrong, an over-reliance creating a real unrealistic outcome from AI. I mean, there are many YouTube videos where there's a conversation with ChatGPT and it's being convinced that 2 + 2 = 5.
Going back to your education point, I think that was a good one because to be able to do that, to be able to work in these ways is going to require education. And I think most of our discussion has been about individual level interaction, but what do we think about companies and how they should be educating? We've had guests, for example, Katia Walsh at Levi's had a boot camp, Michelle McCracken at Delta, they also had a boot camp. What kinds of things are people needing to do to promote that education? And what kind of education should it be? So boot camp is one answer. But even then, I'm not sure what the boot camp should have in it.
I don't think the answer is a simple, let's everybody have a boot camp. I think the answer is let us segment the types of use. Let us segment the context. Let us identify the various zones that Gen AI is going to be leveraged in our company. There are some no-fly zones that strategically it's not going to happen. There are some places where it has maybe not carte blanche, but it is areas where the risks are so low and
fraud
it
detection
doesn't really matter. Yeah, you don't want to use it for fraud detection, right?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, right? And then there are areas where it is, as always, it's been human in the loop, human and AI, and now what can go wrong, and then what are the guardrails? And what is the proper education for the type of users and the type of situation? I think that's the kind of curricula that's needed.
What I liked about what you said was this pushback against, we hear a lot about boot camps, and I don't want to be negative about boot camps, but they strike me as lacking some of the personalization that the tool offers. That we have a variety of cases, a variety of ways, you've listed a bunch of them, that we can use these tools, and the monolithic boot camp or the sort of classic corporate education doesn't really feel right here. I'm sure you have to do these things in your organization. I have to do them too. These, I don't want to complain about them too much. I understand why many of them exist, but many of these corporate education tools are not particularly tailored to what you know.
Yeah, but look, I mean, this dates me as a person.
It's okay. You're in a safe space with me.
But like, I do think about spreadsheets, and I do think about the education I went through as a young consultant, learning how to get the best out of spreadsheets. Because
right, you had to miss a total at some point to get that right.
And how to use a formula, or how do you do it better or faster? And as the tool evolved, then more education and more education. And I do actually think those things help. And
did you get to be a guru of spreadsheets by classes or by doing?
By both. But the classes really helped. And talking to people who were in those classes really helped. And then it depends on what you're using it for. It wasn't the same, for everyone. Right. I mean, I think most consultants, when they start this, they were in the world of numbers and spreadsheets, and they do that and they check and debug. And now the thing is so advanced that it's making, like, debugging itself. And, it's telling you, are you sure you want to do this? But I do think that right now, this is a black box. And I think there is such a big variance within an organization in people's understanding of risks and benefits and what it can do and what it can't do. And is it going to replace me or is it not going to replace me? Like, there's just such noise and level of misunderstanding that the only way to break through that is through real thoughtful design of content and education that's company-wide. And I agree with you that I think, like, for most corporations, the way they deal with this right now is by creating
kind of the monolithic package.
Right, exactly. Well, creating a monolithic package for education, but I don't think we have yet developed the right curricula at scale for the learning and development of the enterprise. I mean, many companies have done it. We have done it at BCG because we use these tools all the time, and we need to know. But for a typical company, for a non-digital native company, I don't think these curricula exist. And I think that this is a real big concern for the chief human resource officers of these companies to put in place these kinds of curricula.
Yeah, but it seems time because, by analogy, I liked your spreadsheet analogy because spreadsheets are what opened up the world of computers to most people. They're part of the killer app that opened up the use of personal computers for most people. And I expect that the large language models are going to have that same sort of effect with artificial intelligence. That's the gateway, the inroad for most people to artificial intelligence. And you're right. I think most companies don't have good curricula for that. We've got a bonus episode coming up in a couple of weeks talking about exactly this talent in the world of generative AI. So everyone can pay attention to that. Thanks for listening today. Next time, Shervin and I talk with Rebecca Finley, CEO of the Partnership on AI. Please join us.
Thanks for listening to Me, Myself, and AI. We believe, like you, that the conversation about AI implementation doesn't start and stop with this podcast. That's why we've created a group on LinkedIn specifically for listeners like you. It's called AI for Leaders. And if you join us, you can chat with show creators and hosts, ask your own questions, share your insights, and gain access to valuable resources about AI implementation from MIT SMR and BCG, you can access it by visiting mitsmr.com/AI for leaders. We'll put that link in the show notes, and we hope to see you there.